On a dark, rainy night, Preston and Meredith Blake did the unthinkable. They took a tiny plastic plate of food, slammed it onto the cold hardwood floor, and forced a helpless toddler to eat on his knees. They laughed as the little boy cried. They threatened to make his mother homeless if she spoke a single word. They thought they were the kings of the world. But they made one fatal mistake. They didn't know that the boy's mother was under the protection of the most feared man in the city. And they didn't know that every single second of their cruelty was being streamed live to a billionaire's phone. Grant Stone was driving home when he saw the video. His blood turned to ice. By the time the sun rose, he would launch a brutal, crushing revenge that would strip the Blakes of their wealth, their houses, and their dignity. This is a story of ultimate disrespect and a savage, calculating revenge that will leave you breathless. Stay tuned till the very end, because how this billionaire cleans out the trash is something you will never forget. Before we begin this incredible journey, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story. And right now, go down to the comments section. Tell us, where are you watching this video from? We love reading about our global family. Now let us begin. Grant Stone was a name that made powerful men tremble. He was a billionaire many times over. He owned shipping lines, real estate empires, and tech companies. In the business world, Grant was known as a ghost. He rarely did interviews. He never went to red carpet galas. He lived in a massive, secluded estate on top of a hill overlooking the city. The mansion was beautiful, but it was lonely. It was built of white marble, tall glass windows, and expensive mahogany. Yet, for a long time, it felt more like a museum than a home. It was cold. That changed when Sarah Jenkins started working there. Sarah was 24 years old. She was a woman of incredible grace, but life had not been kind to her. 2 years ago, her husband had abandoned her the moment she gave birth to their son, Leo. Left with no money and no family, Sarah had to survive. She took odd jobs, cleaned houses, and skipped meals just to buy formula for her baby. When Grant's head housekeeper hired Sarah, it felt like a miracle. The pay was fair, and the mansion was safe. But Sarah had a major dilemma. She could not afford daycare. Daycare in the city cost more than her rent. On her third day of work, Grant caught her hiding little Leo in the staff break room. Sarah had broken out in tears. She fell to her knees, begging Grant not to fire her. She promised the baby would never make a sound. Grant, who was known for firing CEOs over a single mistake, did something unexpected. He looked at the chubby-cheeked baby boy. Leo had looked up at the billionaire and giggled. He reached out his tiny hands and grabbed Grant's expensive silk tie. Grant's cold heart melted. He did not fire Sarah. Instead, he gave her a permanent room in the staff quarters. He told her that Leo was welcome in the main house during the day, as long as he was supervised. Over the next year, a beautiful routine developed. Sarah worked hard. She kept the mansion spotless. She polished the silver and tended to the gardens. And little Leo became the joy of the house. Grant found himself looking forward to coming home. He would sit in his grand library, and Leo would waddle in, holding a plastic toy truck. The billionaire would actually get down on his knees. He would play with the toddler on the thick Persian rugs. To the world, Grant was a shark. To Leo, he was just Uncle Grant. Sarah was deeply grateful. She kept her distance and remained highly professional. She knew her place. She was the maid, and Grant was the master. But Grant treated them like family when no one was looking. He bought Leo clothes. He ensured Sarah had the best health care. It was a peaceful, happy arrangement. But peace never lasts forever when envious people are around. It was the beginning of autumn. Grant was working on a massive merger. It was a multi-billion-dollar deal that would unite his shipping empire with the major European conglomerate. To finalize the deal, Grant needed the approval of his board members and key investors. These investors were old money elites. They were people who believed that wealth made them superior human beings. The leader of this group was a man named Preston Blake. Preston was a billionaire himself, but he was inherited wealth. He had never worked a hard day in his life. He was arrogant, loud, and treated working-class people like dirt. Preston was traveling with his wife Meredith, a woman who wore diamonds to breakfast and sneered at anyone who wore cheap shoes. With them were a younger wealthy couple from the board who lived to impress Preston and Meredith. Grant needed to host them for a private, 3-day weekend summit at his estate. He wanted to close the deal quietly, away from the prying eyes of the media. On the day of their arrival, the mansion was buzzing. Sarah worked from dawn. She scrubbed the floors until they shone like mirrors. She prepared the guest rooms with the finest linens. She helped the chef prepare a 5-star menu. Before the guests arrived, Grant called Sarah into his study. "Sarah," Grant said softly, "I have some difficult people coming this weekend. They are traditional, old-fashioned, and frankly, quite unpleasant. For the next 3 days, it might be best to keep Leo in your quarters or the kitchen area. I don't want them causing any drama for you." Sarah nodded understandingly. "Of course, Mr. Stone. I completely understand. Leo will stay out of sight." "Thank you," Grant said. "Once this weekend is over, things will go back to normal. I bought Leo a new picture book, by the way. It's on the table." Sarah smiled warmly. "You are too good to us, sir." At 4 in the afternoon, 2 sleek black limousines pulled up the long driveway. Preston Blake stepped out, adjusting his expensive coat. Meredith followed, holding a tiny designer dog. Grant met them at the grand entrance. He wore his usual polite, professional mask. "Welcome to my home," Grant said, shaking Preston's hand. "Ah, Grant," Preston boomed. "Lovely place. A bit isolated, but grand. Let's hope your hospitality matches your net worth." Meredith didn't even look at Grant. She immediately handed her heavy fur coat to Sarah, who was standing quietly by the door. "Be careful with that," Meredith snapped at Sarah. "It costs more than your life savings. Don't get your cheap perfume on it." Sarah kept her eyes down. "Yes, ma'am. I will take care of it." Grant's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't like the tone, but he chose to stay quiet. He needed this deal signed. He guided his guests to the grand drawing room. The nightmare had begun. The first 2 days were exhausting for Sarah. The guests were incredibly demanding. Meredith would ring the service bell at 3 in the morning just to demand a specific brand of sparkling water. Preston would deliberately drop ash from his expensive cigars onto the pristine hardwood floors, laughing as Sarah had to sweep it up. Sarah bore it all with silence and grace. She needed this job. She needed to protect her son. Leo was a good boy. He stayed in the kitchen with the chef or in Sarah's small bedroom. He played quietly with his new book. But on the 3rd evening, things went wrong. Grant had been called out of the house urgently. A minor fire had broken out at one of his local shipping warehouses. He had to go handle the emergency services and insurance adjusters personally. "I will be back by 9 p.m., Grant told Preston before leaving. "The chef has prepared a spectacular dinner. Please enjoy the dining room without me. We will sign the final papers tonight when I return." "Go ahead, Grant," Preston said with a smirk. "Business always comes first. We will manage." With Grant gone, the guests felt like they owned the mansion. They drank heavily from Grant's private collection of rare wines. They became loud, obnoxious, and mean. In the kitchen, Sarah was helping the chef plate the main course. It was a beautiful filet mignon with truffle reduction. Leo was sitting in a high chair in the corner of the kitchen. He was tired and hungry. He started to fuss. "Mama," Leo whined softly. "Hungry." Sarah felt a pang of guilt. She had been so busy serving the guests that she hadn't given her son his dinner yet. She quickly put some mashed potatoes, peas, and a small piece of chicken on a plastic toddler plate. "Here, my sweet boy," Sarah whispered, kissing his forehead. "Eat quietly. Mama has to go serve the guests." Just then, Meredith's voice boomed through the kitchen intercom. "Where's our food? We have been waiting for 10 minutes. Get in here now." Sarah panicked. She picked up a heavy silver tray loaded with dinner plates. She rushed out of the kitchen toward the grand dining room. But little Leo didn't want to be left alone. He missed his mother. He climbed down from his high chair. He was small and nimble. He quietly followed his mother out of the kitchen, his little plastic plate held tightly in his tiny hands. Sarah entered the dining room. The guests were sitting around a massive mahogany table. The room was lit by a crystal chandelier. Sarah began serving the plates. "Here is your dinner," Mr. Blake. Mrs. Blake, your steak is medium well, just as you requested. About time, Meredith sniffed. Suddenly, a small sound came from the doorway. Clack. Everyone turned to look. Little Leo had walked into the dining room. He had dropped his plastic spoon. He stood there in his faded overalls, blinking at the bright lights. He saw his mother and smiled. Mama, Leo said happily. Sarah's heart dropped into her stomach. Her blood ran cold. Leo. No, honey. Go back to the kitchen, she whispered frantically. Meredith gasped, pulling her silk skirts away, as if a rat had entered the room. What is that? What is a child doing in this house? Preston dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the porcelain. Grant runs a tight ship, but he lets his servants breed in the house. Disgusting. Preston saw an opportunity to exert his power. He was drunk, and he was a bully. Wait a minute, Preston said, his voice dripping with malice. The boy is hungry, isn't he? He's holding a plate. Sarah froze. Yes, sir, but I will feed him in the kitchen. No, Preston said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. The kitchen is for staff, but since he broke the rules and came into our dining room, he should eat here, but he doesn't belong at a table. Meredith laughed, catching on to her husband's cruel game. You're right, Preston. Servants and their offspring don't sit in chairs. Preston pointed a heavy, diamond-ringed finger at the floor, right next to the dining table. Put him there, Preston commanded. Let him eat on the floor, like the little dog he is. Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. She looked at Preston, then at Meredith. Both were smiling. Sir, please, Sarah begged, tears welling up in her eyes. He's only 2 years old. He doesn't understand. Please let me take him to the kitchen. Preston's face turned cold. The smile vanished. Are you talking back to me? Do you know who I am? I am the man who holds Grant Stone's future in my hands. If I call Grant right now and tell him your brat ruined my appetite, you will be thrown out onto the street tonight. Do you want to be homeless, girl? Sarah looked down at Leo. Leo was looking up at her with big, innocent eyes. He didn't understand the cruelty in the room. He just knew his mommy looked sad. Sarah's hands trembled. She had no money. She had no place to go. If she was fired tonight, in the pouring rain, her son would suffer. She had to swallow her pride. She had to endure the ultimate humiliation to protect her child. With a breaking heart, Sarah gently guided Leo to the floor. She placed his plastic plate on the cold hardwood, right next to Preston Blake's expensive leather shoes. Eat here, sweetie, Sarah whispered, a tear escaping her eye and falling onto the floor. Leo looked confused. He looked at the floor, then at his mom. But he was hungry. He sat down on the cold floor, crossed his little legs, and picked up a piece of chicken with his fingers. Preston laughed loudly. He intentionally moved his foot, kicking a tiny bit of dirt from his shoe right next to Leo's plate. There you go. Good boy, Preston mocked. Meredith sneered. Now, Maid, pour us more wine. And don't look so miserable. We are teaching your son his place in the world. Sarah stood there, her body shaking with silent sobs. She had to stand by and watch her innocent, beautiful baby boy eat off the floor while 2 millionaires laughed at him. She had never felt so helpless. She had never felt such deep, burning pain. She poured the wine. Her hand shook so much that a drop spilled onto the tablecloth. Watch it, you clumsy idiot. Meredith snapped. Sarah apologized through her tears. She wanted to die of shame. What the guests did not know was that the mansion was equipped with a state-of-the-art security system. Every room had high-definition cameras that streamed directly to Grant Stone's private phone. Grant was currently sitting in the back of his limousine, driving back from the warehouse. The issue had been resolved quickly. He was bored, so he decided to check his security app to see how dinner was going. When Grant opened the live feed of the dining room, he expected to see his guests enjoying their meal. Instead, he saw Sarah crying. He saw Preston Blake mocking her. And then, the camera panned down. Grant saw little Leo, the boy he considered a nephew, the boy he played with on the floor out of love. Leo was sitting on the hard floor, eating like an animal, while Preston Blake kicked dirt near his food. Grant's blood turned to ice. Then it turned to pure, boiling rage. The driver looked in the rearview mirror. He saw Grant's face. The billionaire's jaw was clenched so tight it looked like marble. His eyes were wide with a terrifying, silent fury. "Sir, is everything all right?" the driver asked, frightened. Grant did not answer immediately. He picked up his phone and made a call to his most trusted ally and chief financial officer, Winston. His voice was incredibly calm, but it was the calm before a devastating storm. "Winston," Grant said, his voice deadly sharp. "The Blake Group. I want you to short their stock. Right now. Dump all our shares. Call our partners in Asia. Tell them we are pulling out of the shipping alliance with Preston Blake. Crush them." "Right away, Mr. Stone," Winston replied, not needing to ask questions. He knew that tone of voice. Grant spoke to Winston again. "Get the security footage from the dining room downloaded and ready. Send it to the major news networks. Tell them to broadcast it live in exactly 15 minutes. Grant hung up the phone. He looked out the window into the dark, rainy night. "Driver," Grant said softly, "step on it. We have a trash collection to do at the house." Back in the dining room, the guests had finished their dinner. They had moved back to the grand drawing room. Sarah had quickly rushed Leo back to her quarters. She was currently holding her son, rocking him back and forth, crying silently into his hair. Leo was fast asleep, unaware of the trauma his mother was feeling. At exactly 9 p.m., the grand front doors of the mansion opened. Grant Stone walked in. He looked perfectly calm. He took off his coat and handed it to his butler. He walked into the drawing room where Preston and Meredith were drinking brandy. "Grant," Preston cried out, holding up his glass. "You missed a splendid dinner. The steak was excellent. Although, your staff needs some training." Meredith chimed in. "Yes, Grant. You really must look into the quality of your maids. One of them let a filthy child roam into the dining room. We had to teach them some manners." Grant walked over to the fireplace. He stood with his back to the flames, his hands behind his back. He looked at each of them. His expression was unreadable. "Oh, is that so?" Grant asked smoothly. "And how did you teach them manners, Meredith?" Preston laughed, thinking Grant would agree with him. "Well, the boy was hungry, so I told the maid to put him on the floor. Let him eat down there. You know how it is, Grant. You can't let these people think they can sit at the same table as us. You give them an inch, they take a mile." Grant let out a soft, dark chuckle. It was a sound that should have terrified them, but they were too arrogant to notice. "On the floor," Grant repeated. "You made a 2-year-old child eat on the floor." "Yes," Preston said, sipping his brandy. "Now let's get down to business. We have the merger papers right here. Let's sign them so we can all celebrate." Preston pointed to a thick leather folder on the coffee table. Grant walked over to the table. He didn't pick up the folder. Instead, he picked up a remote control. He pressed a button, and a massive projection screen slid down from the ceiling of the drawing room. The guests looked up, confused. "Grant, what is this?" Preston asked. Grant pressed another button. The screen lit up. It was the high-definition security footage from the dining room from an hour ago. The video showed Preston sneering. It showed Meredith laughing. It showed Sarah crying, begging for mercy. And it showed little Leo being forced onto the floor, with Preston's shoe right next to his face. The room went dead silent. The amusement vanished from the guests' faces. "Grant, come now," Preston said, his voice dropping a bit. "It was just a joke. The servant didn't mind. She needs to keep her kid in check." Grant turned to look at Preston. When he spoke, his voice was not loud. It was a cold, terrifying whisper that echoed in the large room. "That boy," Grant said, "is my family. That woman is under my protection. You came into my house. You ate my food. You drank my wine. And then you abused a child and humiliated a mother because you thought your money made you gods." Meredith stood up, her face turning pale. "Grant, you are overreacting. He's just a maid's son. To me, he is a human being," Grant snapped, his eyes flashing with fury. "To you, he is dirt. But tonight, you are going to learn what it feels like to be at the very bottom." Preston tried to puff out his chest. Listen here, Stone. You need us for this merger. Without our capital, your European expansion is dead. You better watch your mouth before we walk out that door and destroy your stock price." Grant smiled. It was the smile of a predator that had already trapped its prey. "Walk out?" Grant asked. "Oh, Preston, you aren't walking out. You are being thrown out. And as for my stock price, you should check your own." Right on cue, Preston's phone buzzed violently. Then Meredith's phone rang. Preston frowned and pulled out his phone. It was an emergency text from his primary broker. He opened it. His eyes widened in horror. What is this?" Preston stammered. Grant sat down in an armchair, crossing one leg over the other. "10 minutes ago, Winston executed my order to dump all our shares in Blake Enterprises. We also called your 3 major shipping partners in Tokyo and Singapore. Winston shared the video of how you treat people, and they immediately terminated their contracts with you." You can't do that," Preston yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "That's market manipulation." "It's business," Grant said coldly. "And it gets worse. Look at the television news, Preston." Grant switched the channel on the big screen. A major financial news network was broadcasting live. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Blake Enterprises in freefall AS horrifying video of CEO abusing child surfaces." The news anchor was speaking in a shocked tone. "We have just received leaked security footage from a private residence. It appears to show billionaire Preston Blake and his wife forcing a toddler to eat off the floor like an animal. The public backlash has been instantaneous. Activists are calling for a complete boycott of all Blake products, and the board of directors is already calling for an emergency meeting to remove Blake as CEO." Meredith let out a sharp shriek. She dropped her glass of brandy. It shattered on the marble floor. No, this can't be happening. Our reputation." Preston was shaking. He looked at the television screen. The stock graph for his company was a straight line going down. He had lost hundreds of millions of dollars in a matter of minutes. His life's work, his legacy, was being erased before his eyes. "You're a monster, Stone," Preston growled, his voice breaking. "No," Grant said, standing up. "I am a man who respects the rules of humanity. You broke them. Now get out of my house." "Fine," Preston shouted. "Try to maintain some dignity. We are leaving. Call our limousines." "Your limousines are gone," Grant said calmly. "I told the drivers to leave. They don't work for you anymore. I paid them a bonus to drive away." "What?" Meredith gasped. "But it's pouring rain outside. How are we supposed to get to the hotel?" Grant walked over to the grand front doors and opened them wide. The cold autumn wind rushed in, carrying the heavy scent of rain. The storm was raging outside. Lightning flashed across the sky. "You can walk," Grant said. "The main gates are 2 miles down the driveway. I suggest you start moving before I have my security guards forcibly drag you off my property." Preston looked out at the dark, rainy night. He looked at Grant's cold, unwavering eyes. He knew he had lost. He had no power here. He was no longer a feared billionaire. He was a disgraced man whose name was currently being dragged through the mud across the world. Without another word, Preston grabbed his crying wife by the arm and walked out into the rain. As they stepped onto the wet driveway, the cold rain immediately soaked through their expensive silk clothes. Meredith's designer hair was ruined in seconds. Preston's expensive leather shoes squelched in the mud. They looked pathetic. They looked small. Grant watched them walk into the darkness for a moment. Then, he closed the heavy mahogany doors, locking out the cold. Grant walked back through the quiet mansion. He walked up the stairs to the staff quarters. He knocked gently on Sarah's door. The door opened slowly. Sarah stood there, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked terrified, thinking Grant was here to fire her because of the drama. "Mr. Stone," she whispered, "I'm so sorry about tonight. I will pack my bags and leave right now." Grant held up a hand, stopping her. His face was soft and warm. "Sarah," Grant said gently, "you are not going anywhere. The people who hurt you and Leo have been dealt with. They will never bother you again. In fact, they will never bother anyone again." Sarah looked confused. "What do you mean, sir?" "Come with me," Grant said. He led her downstairs to the grand dining room. The table had been cleared, but a new setup had been prepared. At the head of the table sat little Leo. He had woken up, and the chef had prepared a fresh, hot plate of his favorite pancakes with syrup. Leo was happily swinging his legs, eating with a big smile on his face. Next to him was a seat for Sarah and a seat for Grant. "From now on," Grant said, looking at Sarah, "you and Leo do not eat in the kitchen. You do not eat on the floor. You eat here, at the table with me. You are not just my staff, Sarah. You are the heart of this home." Sarah covered her mouth with her hands. Tears started to flow again, but this time they were tears of pure joy and relief. She fell into Grant's arms, hugging him tightly. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you for saving us." Grant hugged her back, looking over her shoulder at little Leo, who waved a pancake at him. "We are family now," Grant whispered, "and nobody messes with family." The arrogant guests thought they could look down on the weak. They thought their wealth gave them the right to be cruel. But they learned a brutal lesson that night. True power doesn't come from a bank account. It comes from integrity, kindness, and the willingness to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Preston and Meredith Blake lost everything. Within a year, their companies went bankrupt, and they became social outcasts. They learned what it was like to be at the bottom. Meanwhile, the Stone Mansion was no longer a cold house of stone. It was full of laughter, warmth, and love. Little Leo grew up knowing he was safe, loved, and that he would always have a seat at the table. What did you think of Grant's brutal revenge? Did those arrogant guests get what they deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next story.